minutes.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the Fine Gael group for putting forward this motion, and I think framing it very carefully and very importantly in terms of international law, because when we talk of sides and approaches, the key thing is Ireland has been unequivocal in condemning Russia's aggression and invasion of Ukraine, because it is a breach of international law and the UN Charter, which calls and requires on countries to refrain from the use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of another state. And that's really important. To place that frame at the very beginning of the motion, I think, is really crucial, because Ireland's power internationally, a lot of it comes from the fact that we are seen as champions of international law, and that we come with a political record of having championed, not engaging in issues, and this is where the non-aligned and neutrality, an active neutrality that we've had, is not about passivity or not doing things. It is about Ireland operating on a politics of principle, on international multilateral principles, on being known to be consistent and strong in how seriously we take them, and being willing to criticise wherever the breach might happen, and the fact that we don't operate simply in a politics of kind of big powers or client states, or the kind of a simple version of allies and interests. And that is, it's the idea that we engage on principles rather than interests is fundamental to Ireland's credibility and its power in the world. And that's why, for example, Ireland was able to negotiate the ban on cluster munitions, which unfortunately Russia is one of 3 or 4 countries in the world that they did not sign up to it, and which have shamefully used them in their atrocious attacks on Ukraine. So again, Ireland has contributed in that way and been powerful in that way. And again, in some of the other parts of this motion, in terms of Ireland being to the forefront at the United Nations level and within the General Assembly, because we know the blocks that are happening at the Security Council, but in fact, being able to engage with the hundreds of countries in the General Assembly that go beyond just EU countries, but the many other countries. Ireland is a crucial bridge in building international-wide support and condemnation of Russia's breaches of human rights law and of international law. Also, another part of diplomacy, and I've always argued that this is part of diplomacy, including in relation to situations such as Israel's occupation of Palestine, that sanctions are a legitimate part, a hard diplomacy. And I've been glad that Ireland has been to the forefront in applying sanctions. And of course, I've just come from the Finance Committee, and again we're discussing how do we ensure that we don't just look to the issue of SWIFT, but that we make sure assets of some of the named and listed oligarchs who act as support for Mr. Putin internally, that their assets are genuinely tracked down throughout our financial services sector, and I think that's really important. Crucially, though, where Ireland has been incredibly important is in terms of humanitarian leadership. Again, the argument for humanitarian access corridors, for emergency supplies, in terms of ensuring that we get and help people get to safety. And I want to really commend those points and arguments and suggestions and really pragmatic ideas that are in the motion in respect of how we make that humanitarian support real and practical. I would note, I think the Temporary Protection Directive is a really good thing. So this is something that allows, allowing the Ukrainian refugees to come to any part of the EU. It is a pity that this was not used in respect of Syria, and the European Parliament, the EU Parliament, had actually asked that the same directive would be used in respect of the Syrian refugees in 2015, where again, we had refugees, with hospitals bombed by Russian bombs in Syria, and it was an early signal of inappropriate action, and we should have been addressing the same humanitarian action and the same intensive diplomatic response at that time. In respect of those issues of refugees, there's a couple of issues I did want to just slightly highlight. One of the lines in the motion talks of the mainly women and children arriving in Ireland, and I think it's just really important that we have a little bit of a caution note, that we don't create a framing or a dynamic where we create a stigma if there are men who are refugees from Ukraine, for example. You know, Albert Einstein was a refugee, and his contribution was pretty immense in terms of setting up the International Rescue Committee and others. And I'm not suggesting that that's the intention at all, but I just know it's a phrase that's been used. It's been used in the media a lot. And in fact, we know that it's really important when we look, for example, to LGBTQ activists would be particularly vulnerable at this time. When we look to some of the other activists in the environmental area who are being particularly vulnerable. So just to recognise that you will have lots of people of lots of different kinds who will be needing to seek refuge. And what I like about this motion is that it looks to not just giving people safety, but ensuring that they still have opportunities to contribute, to continue with their education, to continue with their employment, and to contribute to society in that way. Lastly, I just want to kind of note again, really in a note of hope, in a difficult time, that even there's a lot of study often of how wars start, but less attention often paid to how wars end. And as one of the other speakers said, it comes through difficult negotiation, really difficult negotiation. And I hope that we will have some progress and success in the negotiations currently. I wish President Zelensky and others well in those negotiations. I know that, for example, being a neutral state is maybe one of the outcomes that may come. And I hope that Ukraine are able to be a neutral state in that context within the European Union. And that's something that's available to them, is to be in the European Union and a member state of that if they are a neutral state. And I think that's going to be important. We all hope for the best in that. And I just, again, I want to support the motion and commend it, and to thank all across this House who have consistently worked together on issues of human rights. And I think that's something that the Seanad can be very proud of.
Thank you, Senator.